The morning sun rose slowly over a quiet coastal town in the Philippines, brushing the rooftops with a warm golden glow. Inside a small wooden house patched with years of struggle, a young man named Rico de la Vega, 22, sat at the edge of his bed, holding an old, worn-out vinyl record, his grandfather's favorite Elvis album. The edges were cracked, the cover faded, yet to him it was a treasure. It was the first thing that ever made him believe that music could heal a wounded heart. Rico's life had always traveled through storms. His father walked away when he was 8, leaving behind silence that echoed for years. His mother worked long days and longer nights, returning home exhausted but trying to smile. In that silence, music became his only companion. He learned to sing with the same softness he used to mend his own pain. But even with a voice rich in emotion, Rico carried doubt like a shadow. His words stumbled. His confidence broke easily. He often felt his dreams were too big for someone living in a house too small to hold them. The only person who saw his light clearly was Lana, his 17-year-old sister. She was gentle, patient, and fiercely protective of him. Where Rico saw fear, Lana saw potential. Where he hesitated, she encouraged. She believed his voice had the power to move people, not just because it sounded good, but because it carried truth. Every night, she would sit beside him as he practiced in the dim light of a single bulb, his voice drifting out into the quiet streets. Neighbors passing by often stopped to listen. His songs carried both the weight of his struggles and the warmth of his heart. It was Lana who convinced him to audition for America's Got Talent. She filled out the forms, held his hand through every doubt, and reminded him that dreams don't belong only to those who are confident, they belong to those who never stop trying. Now, miles away from home, Rico stood behind the AGT stage curtains. His heart pounded. His palms were cold. The arena felt like a universe too big for him. But he closed his eyes and remembered his grandfather's promise, the promise that a broken beginning doesn't define the final song. With a trembling breath, Rico stepped into the spotlight, carrying every hope he had left. The moment Rico stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage, the world seemed to stretch far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Bright lights washed over him like a sudden wave, and for a second, he felt as if he couldn't breathe. The stage felt massive, almost too massive for someone who came from a tiny wooden house near the sea. The audience shifted, whispering, waiting, wondering who he was and what he would bring. Rico's heartbeat echoed in his ears. He tried to steady it, but the noise inside his chest only grew louder. He had sung in front of crowds before, small gatherings, local fiestas, school events, but this stage was different. This was the kind of stage where dreams either soared or shattered in seconds. He glanced at the judges' table. 4 faces. 4 destinies. 4 paths that could change his life. And among them was Simon Cowell, the one whose approval could open doors he never thought he could reach. The weight of that reality pressed heavily on Rico's shoulders. As he stood in the center of the stage, memories from his past flickered like old film reels. The tiny karaoke machine he used as a child. The nights he sang to drown out loneliness. The promise he made to himself that one day, somehow, he would show the world who he was. But dreams were fragile things. The music began to play, soft at first, familiar but intimidating under such powerful speakers. Rico took a breath, but the breath wavered. His first note trembled, thin and shaky. It wasn't the voice he practiced. It wasn't the voice Lana believed in. It was the voice of fear. In the audience, he felt shoulders stiffen. He sensed doubts rising. And then, he saw it. Simon Cowell's hand moving upward. A gesture that had ended countless dreams. A sign that the performance wasn't strong enough to continue. Time seemed to slow. Rico felt the stage tilt beneath him, as if everything he had worked for was slipping away. His throat tightened. His palms sweated. His entire world narrowed into one terrifying realization: this might be the end before his real beginning even started. Backstage, Lana pressed her hands together, silently pleading for him not to break. In that fragile, quiet moment, Rico stood between the life he lived and the life he wanted, suspended in a single breath. And that breath would change everything. The arena seemed to hold its breath as Simon's hand hovered in the air. For Rico, it felt like the entire world was narrowing into that single gesture. A lifetime of struggle, practice, sacrifice, and silent nights suddenly felt dangerously close to slipping away. His chest tightened. His knees weakened. His dream trembled under the weight of the moment. But then, something shifted. Somewhere deep inside him, past the layers of fear, past the memories of doubt, past every moment he thought he wasn't enough, Rico felt a familiar warmth. It was the voice of the boy who used to sing beside his grandfather's old radio. The boy who believed music could heal even the deepest wounds. The boy who promised he would never stop singing. That boy awakened. Rico closed his eyes, not to escape the moment, but to finally face it. He drew a breath, steady and deep, as if pulling strength from every painful experience he had survived. The breath traveled through him like a quiet fire, pushing away the trembling, replacing fear with purpose. And then he sang. But this time, it was different. The note that left his lips did not belong to the frightened young man who had stepped on stage minutes ago. It came from a place raw and powerful, filled with heartbreak, resilience, and an aching beauty. His voice rose like a wave breaking free from the darkest ocean. It carried warmth, depth, and a striking echo of Elvis, yet it remained undeniably his own. The crowd froze. People shifted forward in their seats, pulled by an unseen magnet. Some held their breath without realizing it. Even the judges leaned closer, eyebrows lifting as if they had just witnessed something impossible. Rico's voice soared higher, steadier, sweeping through the arena with an unexpected strength. The trembling that once cracked his first notes disappeared. A new confidence emerged, blossoming like a flame in the darkness. Every rise and fall of his tone carried the energy of someone who had finally stepped into the truth of who he was meant to be. Simon's raised hand slowly lowered. Something extraordinary was happening. Something rare. Something unforgettable. Rico wasn't just singing anymore. He was revealing the soul he had protected all his life. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't scream. They simply listened, silent, stunned, captured. Because they all knew. This was the moment his life was turning into a story people would never stop talking about. The moment Rico's voice rose into the arena, something in the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the room itself awakened, stirred by a sound that carried both the ache of the past and the hope of the future. His notes moved with a kind of sincerity that could only be born from struggle. Each rise of his tone carried emotion heavy enough to touch even the coldest hearts. Slowly, people began to rise from their seats. One row stood, then another, and soon the entire front section of the theater leaned forward, connected by an invisible thread woven from Rico's voice. The audience wasn't reacting out of excitement, they were reacting out of emotion. His performance no longer felt like a competition, it felt like a story being told through sound. Faces softened. Eyes glistened. Hands pressed against chests as if trying to steady the sudden rush of feeling. Those who had come expecting just another contestant now found themselves witnessing something far more intimate, a young man pouring his whole life onto a stage thousands of miles from home. Backstage, Lana watched from the small monitor, her hands trembling as she pressed them together. She had seen him sing his entire life, yet she had never seen him like this. This wasn't the shy brother who once doubted every step he took. This was someone transformed, someone who had taken all his fear and turned it into fire. As Rico continued, the lights above him brightened, creating a soft halo around his silhouette. The stage no longer looked intimidating. It looked like it belonged to him. Every motion, every breath, every note felt intentional. His voice wrapped around the arena with warmth, as if comforting everyone who listened. Even the judges, known for their cool composure, seemed undone. Their expressions softened, their eyes fixed on the young Filipino singer who had risen from a trembling start into a breathtaking performance. They sensed it, the rare kind of talent that comes not only from skill, but from a heart that has lived through storms and still chooses to shine. When Rico hit his final, soaring note, it felt as if time briefly stopped. The sound lingered in the air, long enough to stir something deep within every listener. And then, the arena erupted. Thunderous applause surged from every direction. People stood, clapped, cheered, some wiping away tears they didn't expect to shed. It wasn't just appreciation, it was gratitude. Gratitude for the reminder that even the quietest dreams could rise louder than fear. In that overwhelming roar, Rico realized what he had just done. He hadn't just performed. He had changed hearts. The applause did not fade quickly. It rolled through the arena like a wave that refused to settle, rising and falling with the power of thousands of hands celebrating the moment they had just witnessed. Rico stood in the center of that storm, overwhelmed by the sound he had once only dreamed of hearing. For a long moment, he didn't move. He simply breathed, allowing the reality of everything to sink in. The bright stage lights softened as the camera zoomed closer, capturing the emotion glistening in his eyes. Beneath the glow, he looked both young and timeless, like a boy who had finally found the courage to stand inside his own light. He felt the presence of every person who had walked with him through the dark, his mother's strength, his grandfather's passion for music, the quiet nights of practice, the morning bus rides, the disappointments, and the resilience that carried him forward. Backstage, Lana burst into tears. Not out of sadness, but out of the overwhelming joy of watching her brother rise beyond everything they had survived. She had always seen his potential, but now the world was seeing it too. Her trembling hands covered her mouth as she watched him take in the standing ovation that stretched across the arena like a sea of admiration. The judges rose from their seats. Their expressions had changed from curiosity to awe, from uncertainty to respect. Their applause felt heavier, fuller, as if acknowledging that they had just witnessed not just talent, but transformation. Rico had arrived as a contestant. He was leaving as something much bigger. Social media erupted in real time. Clips of his performance flooded every platform. Comments poured in from around the world, people inspired, people moved, people grateful for the reminder that someone who came from so little could give so much. In homes across the Philippines, families gathered around screens, cheering for a boy who carried their pride onto one of the world's biggest stages. As Rico stepped off the stage, Lana rushed toward him. Their embrace was tight, filled with all the unspoken memories of sacrifice and hope. In that moment, it didn't matter how far they had traveled or how impossible the journey once seemed. Rico hadn't just sung a song. He had told his story. He had honored his roots. He had turned pain into purpose. And as the applause finally began to fade, one thing became clear. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of a legacy the world would never forget.